Who would have thought that a simple dispute between two brothers could ignite one of history's largest and longest conflicts, with repercussions spanning centuries and reaching into the present day, involving nations like Israel and Iran? What began with misinterpreted promises wounded pride, and impulsive decisions ultimately escalated into wars, territorial disputes, and a seemingly endless cycle of hatred. Today, you'll uncover how it all started, the figures behind this rivalry, and why even now, the world bears the cost of this ancient division. So go ahead and subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell, because what you're about to discover, you'll unlikely ever forget. The sun beat down fiercely on the dunes of the kingdom of Alker. The wind swept sand back and forth, as if nature, restless, already sensed the events to come. In the center of a small village lived Feud, a man with deep eyes and firm gestures. Respected by his people, he was seen as a wise leader, someone who walked with faith even when the paths seemed invisible. Feud was known for his long walks at dusk. He enjoyed venturing away from a village and alone climbing to the top of a hill where the stars appeared closer. On one of these silent nights, while contemplating the sky, he felt he wasn't alone. An invisible yet powerful presence filled the place. A voice calm and imposing resonated in his mind, as if coming from all corners of the desert at once. It promised him two great deeds. It declared that he would be the father of countless nations, and that his descendants would inherit fertile and abundant lands. Feud remained kneeling for hours, trying to comprehend its meaning. The promise seemed too grand for a man who, until then, carried the burden of infertility in his marriage. Leora, his wife from his youth, was a kind and loyal woman, but she had not yet been able to bear him children. Years of prayers, tears, and frustrated hopes had already shaped both their hearts. Moved by hope and the advice of the elders, Feud made a decision that would forever change the course of his family's history. He married Hagerim, a humble young woman of simple origins but with a generous heart. It wasn't long before Hagerim became pregnant. The birth of Isran was a cause for celebration among the residents of Alker. Feud finally felt complete. His first son was there, healthy and strong, a direct answer to the promise received on that mysterious night. However, destiny, always unpredictable, held another surprise. Months later, when Feud was already convinced that his lineage would only be built through Isran, Leora also became pregnant. The announcement of her pregnancy was met with astonishment and joy. Safir was born amidst celebrations. The residents saw this event as a sign from the heavens, proof that Feud was indeed a chosen man. With two sons from different mothers, Feud now faced an unexpected challenge. He loved both boys with the same intensity, but tensions quietly began to emerge. Small gestures, sideways glances, and unspoken words created an atmosphere of anticipation. It was as if, from their earliest days, the paths of Isran and Safir were already destined to diverge. Feud, in his wisdom, tried to unite the family. He gathered everyone around the campfire, told ancient stories, and spoke of the promises he had once received. But deep down, he also felt that the balance was fragile. Between a father's love and the expectations of a grand future, the first cracks appeared in a destiny that would soon slip from his control. The years flew by quickly in the kingdom of Alker. Isran, Feud's elder son, grew into a young man with a firm posture and determined gaze. His childhood was marked by challenges. From a very young age, he learned that to be noticed, he would have to try harder than anyone else. Every gesture, every word, every small achievement was an attempt to catch his father's attention. Meanwhile, Safir, the second son, grew up surrounded by care and expectations. Leora, his mother, made sure to remind him every day of his importance. The village elders also treated him specially. Safir had access to the best teachers, the most sacred rituals, and the most important advice. His future was being carefully shaped to lead the people of Alker. Isran observed all of this with a mixture of envy and frustration. Although he was the firstborn, he never received the same kind of recognition. His victories in hunts were ignored. His advice in leader meetings was dismissed. Even his achievements in minor battles were seen as natural, almost as if it were his obligation to be strong. Hagerim, his mother, noticed the sadness in her son's eyes. At night, she sat beside him and tried to comfort him with words of encouragement. She told him that a man's worth was not measured by the honors he received, but by the strength with which he faced adversity. Still, Isran's resentment only grew. The arguments between the brothers began with small provocations. An ironic comment here, a dispute during training there. But over time, the discussions became more violent. There were days when they had to be separated by the household servants to prevent physical aggression. Cale, distressed, tried to intervene, but his words no longer had the same effect. The bond between the brothers seemed broken. One morning, after a night of heated argument, Isran made a decision that would forever change the family's history. He gathered his few most loyal friends and announced he would leave the camp. He stated that he would no longer accept living in anyone's shadow and that he would forge his own destiny, far away. Cale tried to persuade him to stay. He spoke of the promises of their shared future, of the blood they shared. But Isran was already determined. His gaze carried the resolve of someone who would not turn back. Before departing, Isran made one last visit to the place where he used to train as a child. He looked at the horizon, took a deep breath, and without saying goodbye to Safir, left with his small group of followers towards the unknown. That night, silence filled Cale's home. Leora cried quietly. Hagrim remained motionless, her eyes fixed on the lamp flame, as if trying to find an answer there. The great separation had begun, and with it, a new chapter of rivalry and estrangement was about to be written in the history of the two nations. Isran journeyed for days through the southern deserts. The sun scorched his skin, and the freezing nights made his bones ache. But in his heart, a flame kept him steadfast, the desire to build something of his own, far from the shadows of his past. He had no map nor an exact destination. He simply followed the instinct of one who refuses to live on scraps. Alongside his few followers, Isran crossed mountains and dry valleys until he reached a land of rocky soil, yet with veins of copper and other precious minerals hidden beneath the surface. Nature there was harsh, but Isran saw potential in every stone, every grain of sand. He decided that this would be the place where his new story would begin. Over time, they started erecting tents, then small stone structures. What was once just a camp transformed into a village and later into a city. Isran named that territory Adara, a name meaning resistance and overcoming. People from distant lands, drawn by Isran's firm leadership and the region's mineral wealth, began migrating to Adara. In a short time, the small group became a strong, determined people with a deep sense of identity. to escape to tell what had happened. The news reached Safir that very night. The king of Alkir, now with graying hair and a more rigid demeanor than ever, immediately convened his war council. The elders, military chiefs, and spiritual leaders gathered in the great stone hall to decide what the response would be. Safir drafted a formal letter, sharp and clear in its language. He demanded reparations for the damages caused, as well as the immediate return of the looted goods. The letter was sent with one of Alkir's most respected messengers. Upon arriving in Adara, the correspondence was delivered directly into Isran's hands. Upon reading Safir's words, Isran smiled with contempt. He considered the demand an affront to his sovereignty. He gathered his commanders and dictated a response filled with irony and disdain. He accused the Alkarians of arrogance and hypocrisy. He stated that Adara would not tolerate intimidation, nor apologize for something that, according to him, was merely an act of legitimate territorial defense. Isran's letter was received in Alkir with indignation. Safir, after reading the contents, remained silent for long minutes, gazing out the royal hall window as if searching the distant mountains for a solution to the impasse. Then, in an unprecedented decision, he ordered the complete closure of the borders between the two kingdoms. He also mandated the construction of a stone and wood wall along the border, with watchtowers every 3 kilometers. The project was regarded as a direct offense by the inhabitants of Adara. Isran, upon learning of the construction, reacted with fury. He called his generals and organized an offensive against the garrisons that were beginning to establish themselves near the wall. He said he loved them equally, that in his eyes, both were worthy, both were part of his legacy. Khald spoke of the pain of seeing separation turn into war. He pleaded, with tears in his eyes, that both rethink their choices, that they not let hatred define the future of their generations. He warned that the promises made to him included blessings, but also responsibilities. The following minutes were marked by an awkward silence. Isran remained with his arms crossed, his eyes fixed on the floor. Safir, in turn, looked out the window, observing in the distance the movement of Alker's soldiers preparing for another day of combat. Neither of them said a word. No gesture of reconciliation. No display of repentance. Only the weight of years of resentment hanging in the air. That night, shortly before midnight, Khald took his last breath. He passed away peacefully, at least in appearance, but with a heart still divided between the sons he loved so much. As the old patriarch's body was prepared for burial, the two brothers left the room, each going in opposite directions. Khald's words echoed in their minds, but neither of them was ready to yield. The war, which had already consumed so many lives, now gained new meaning. The definitive absence of the one who was perhaps the only one capable of uniting the two again. Khald's death marked a point of no return for Adara and Alker. What were once merely tensions and isolated skirmishes escalated into an open and prolonged war. The mourning for the patriarch was short-lived. Soon after the burial, both Isran and Safir returned to their respective kingdoms and intensified military preparations. In the decades that followed, violence ceased to be merely a strategic choice. It became a cultural inheritance. The children of Adara were educated from an early age to see the Alkarians as natural enemies, and in Alker, the youth grew up hearing stories of betrayal and excessive ambition from the Adarites. Lessons in schools, sermons in public assemblies, and even popular songs reinforced this polarized worldview. The elders recounted the ancient promises made to Khald, but each people interpreted the story in a way that justified their own actions. For the Adarites, they were the true chosen people, survivors of historical injustices. For the Alkarians, they were the legitimate heirs of Khald's legacy, the guardians of traditions and order. Prophets began to emerge in both nations. In Alker, preachers ascended platforms and public squares, proclaiming that ultimate victory was near, that the ancestral gods would bless their troops and bring justice to the wronged. In Adara, spiritual leaders announced that the years of suffering were coming to an end and that Isran's people would conquer the promised land, no matter the cost. Even during rare periods of truce, tension remained latent. Peace treaties were signed, but soon broken by small incidents on the borders. An attack on a caravan, a mysterious assassination, a violated military post. A single event was enough to reignite the flames of war. The wall built by Safir, which separated the two territories, became the greatest symbol of this division. It was torn down by Adara's armies, rebuilt by the Alkarians, attacked again, and so on. Every stone in that wall carried the scars of countless battles. More than a physical barrier, it represented the emotional and spiritual distance between two peoples who, despite sharing the same origin, now lived as irreconcilable enemies. Generations passed. Sons, grandsons, and great-grandsons of Isran and Safir inherited not only the territories, but also the hatred. Even those who desired peace were silenced by more radical voices, who used the past as justification for the present. Meanwhile, the desert that had once witnessed promises and hopes now became a silent graveyard of shattered dreams. The cycle of violence seemed endless, as if the very soil of that land had been cursed by the division of the brothers. Centuries passed, but the land between Adara and Alker remains marked by invisible and insurmountable borders. Flags have changed, rulers have changed, but the cause of the conflict remains the same: land, power, and the eternal desire for recognition. New generations grew up learning about the battles their ancestors fought. In schools, history books presented a unilateral narrative, always portraying the other people as the enemy. In public squares, statues of old generals commemorated wartime achievements, while monuments to martyrs reinforced the idea that dying for the cause was a supreme honor. Politicians on both sides found in war a convenient argument to maintain control over their populations. In fiery speeches, they spoke of honor, resistance, and justice. They used strong words, promised definitive victories, and condemned any attempt at dialogue as a sign of weakness. Religious leaders, in turn, reinterpreted the ancient promises made to Khald to justify their actions. They claimed it was a sacred mission to protect their territories, traditions, and beliefs. Faith, which once could have served as a bridge to reconciliation, was now used as a weapon of division. On the borders, generals oversaw new attack plans. Military strategists drew invasion routes, while young soldiers were sent on patrol missions, often without returning. Explosions and gunfire became part of the soundscape. Nights were illuminated more by the flames of conflict than by the stars. However, amidst all this destruction, there were small breaths of hope. On the banks of a narrow river separating the two territories, two children played. One was the daughter of an Alcarian farmer, the other from a simple Adarite family. They did not yet understand the weight of the surnames they carried, nor the stories of hatred that shaped their nations. They played with stones and built small sandcastles as if trying unconsciously to rebuild what previous generations had destroyed. Their laughter echoed along the riverbank, defying the logic of war, ignoring the bitterness their parents and grandparents carried. Some adults watched the scene with strangeness, others with disapproval, but there were those who, in silence, allowed that improbable friendship to continue, perhaps understanding that in that innocence, there still existed a seed of something different. The cycle of broken promises and open wounds, however, continued to turn like a wheel no one seemed able to stop. Newspaper headlines still blazoned new clashes. Emergency meetings were still called whenever a new attack occurred. Khald's legacy, with all its blessings and curses, remained alive, not just in history books or in the speeches of the powerful, but in the visible and invisible scars of every citizen of Adara and Alkar. The future was still uncertain. But that afternoon, by the river, as two children shared a piece of bread and laughed without understanding the reason for so much division around them, there was a small hope. A chance that perhaps one day someone would finally learn the lessons that so many generations insisted on ignoring.